them from Iranian smugglers. And a Russian journalist is sentenced to prison for an unusual protest. Find out what she did when we return. A wedding. According to surveillance footage, a man passed them and started kicking scooters parked nearby. The man approached Carson and his girlfriend in a threatening manner before stabbing Carson repeatedly. Carson died before paramedics could take him to a hospital. The suspect then ran away. Moments later, the footage shows an unknown woman entering the scene. Police believe the woman and the assailant know each other. No arrests have been made. Police issued a wanted poster showing a close-up of the suspect wearing a black Champion sweatshirt. No murder weapon has been recovered. The suspect reportedly threw the weapon in a pile of trash before quickly going back to retrieve it. A catastrophic bus accident in Italy. 21 people are dead and more are injured after a crash last night in northern Italy near Venice. The bus was carrying tourists from all over Europe when it veered off the road and fell close to railway lines. Officials said the vehicle fell around 50 feet onto electricity lines and caught fire. The driver, who also died, was reportedly feeling sick before the crash. A statewide reversal of a
Nevada judge addressed Davis at his appearance.
Mr. Davis, sir, have you retained counsel to represent you in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
Who have you retained?
Edie Paul.
Okay, and is that person going to be here today?
He need to continue for 2 weeks.
All right, we're going to continue this matter for 2 weeks on a Thursday. That date is?
October 19th at 9 a.m.
Okay, we'll be back on that date.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, thank you.
Surprisingly, Davis has been openly discussing firsthand details of the 1996 shooting for several years now. Here's Davis in a 2019 Vlad TV interview explaining the moment he saw Shakur on the night of the shooting.
And he happened to be hanging out the window. He's hanging out the window like he was in parade.
Tupac.
Yeah, he was.
So what happens next?
And we just came, and I ain't gonna go into details like that, you know what I'm saying? But, you know, you got it in a book.
And in his book, Davis even said he provided the gun used to kill Shakur. And Tupac Shakur's stepbrother, Mopreme Shakur, shared his thoughts after Davis was arrested last week.
If you're following up on a crime and you have a main suspect, this guy who they just indicted has been with him, has been telling the same story the whole time for 27 years. Why are you just finally now considering that, you know, he was so close to the number one suspect?
Now, what about Suge Knight, who was driving the car Shakur was in when he was shot? TMZ recently interviewed him from prison, where he's serving a 28-year sentence for manslaughter. And Knight said he would not testify in the case.
Me and Keefe D played on the same Pop Warner football team. And whatever the circumstances, if he had an involvement with anything, if he didn't have any involvement in anything, who want to see? I wouldn't wish somebody going to prison on my worst enemy.
Davis says he and Suge Knight are the only two people still alive who were present during the shooting. Davis's next day in court will be on October 19th. Jason Perry, NTD News.
A New York City were sent by email after the board decided to fly only the American and California flags on campus. NTD's David Lamb speaks with Ryan Jurgensen, who was
the cancel
a temporary
culture.
restraining order for his safety.
So first I'll start off by saying that everything I'm saying is my own thoughts. It's not speaking on behalf of the school district or the school board. Regarding the death threats and threatening emails, there's been, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 that were serious enough to take considerations and report it to law enforcement, and that's being investigated. But there were also quite a few emails and letters that came that were supportive and kind.
Well, Dr. Jurgensen, were you anticipating or expecting this type of reaction?
No, of course not. I'm a school board president at the school that my own children go to. My whole reason for being on the school board and seeking that position 2 years ago was because I have 4 children attending the school and I have another one going.
Other media sources are framing this as a pride flag ban. Can you clarify more on why that could be a misconception?
I'm disappointed that certain groups want to make it about them. There are other groups who have said they want their flags flown. This is not singling out any particular group. That's not
Like
what this
the
discussion is
American
about.
Nazi Party?
But yeah, there are
Antifa?
certain groups and special interests that want to make it about them. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I would love for this school to be about every school child, every student.
What alternatives do you think that the school could take instead of flying flags in order for students to feel more included?
Let's focus on uniting under the flag of the United States of America and the patriotism and nationalism there, and let's work together from there. Let's work on education. Let's work on these things that unite us and bring us together.
Dr. Ryan Jurgensen, Board President of the Sunol Glen Unified School District, thank you again for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Out of the 44 children studied from ages 12 to 15, 34% of those who took puberty blockers self-reported declining mental health. The puberty blocker examined in the study is called triptorelin. It's used to control the hormones in people's bodies, and some common side effects include depression, nausea, and hot flashes. The result of the study may add to the epidemic of deteriorating mental health globally. Nearly 15% of young people have a mental health disorder, according to a survey last year. Another study last year found that in the U.S., almost 22% of children have at least one mental health condition. Changing children's pronouns violates parental rights. This is according to a judge's ruling this week. A school district in Wisconsin had ordered teachers and staff to refer to students by whatever pronouns or names they chose. In response, 2 sets of parents sued the Kettle Moraine School District. One set of parents had a daughter who went to the district's middle school. When the parents insisted that staff refer to her using her legal name and female pronouns, the school refused. Judge Michael Maxwell wrote that the school district violated parental rights and that the parents have the right to choose for their children. Over 3,500 students attend school in the school district. It has 11 schools, including elementary, middle, and high schools. Death threats against a California law targeting doctors, signed into law by his own hand last October. Under that law, doctors would have been forced to follow government narratives on things like masks and vaccines or risk losing their medical licenses. Moments ago, we spoke with Laura Powell, an attorney with Californians for Good Governance. Laura Powell, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now that portions of California's COVID misinformation law have been done away with, what's next for you and your clients who are actually suing the state over this very law?
Yes, I'm co-counsel with the New Civil Liberties Alliance on a case with 5 plaintiffs who are all doctors who challenged this California censorship law. We got in a preliminary injunction in January, so the law has not been enforced since it passed last year, came into force January 1st, and just a few weeks later we had a preliminary injunction. So now we're anticipating, Newsom has now signed the law repealing AB 2098. It will take effect on January 1st. I imagine the state will now move to have our case dismissed as it's moot. And I assume that our lawsuit was part of the motivation for them repealing AB 2098 because they saw the writing on the wall and saw they weren't likely to win, that this law was going to be declared unconstitutional, and they're hoping to avoid a legal precedent that would bind in the future to make a definitive statement about how this law violated the constitutional rights of doctors.
And on that note, how would this law have impacted the doctor-patient relationship if it had stayed in law?
Well, I always thought that a large part of this law was sort of the statement it made to tell doctors that they should be afraid of speaking their mind and telling patients what they truly think, that they needed to stick to the government narrative. So that chilling effect on their speech would happen regardless of whether or not the medical board actually used the law to go after doctors. But what happens there is that the doctor-patient relationship gets damaged because patients can't trust their doctors. And if they believe that the doctors aren't telling them their honest opinion, but are telling them what they think they need to say to protect their medical licenses. So that erosion of the doctor-patient relationship was one of the many reasons why this was a bad policy.
And in your view, given this was enacted into law in the first place, could this happen again down the road?
Well, without a definitive statement from the courts that it's unconstitutional, we have the preliminary injunction, but that wasn't a complete opinion from the courts. It could happen again. Although I think what is happening now is we're going to see a change of tactics. I think repealing this law was a victory for us. We won the battle, but there's still the war to win. And I think the state is changing its tactics. We saw the bill's author stating that they could still go after misinformation from doctors based on pre-existing law. And I know of one case where this is happening, that a doctor who said things like masks don't prevent the spread of viruses is having their license threatened, not under AB 2098, but under the pre-existing general law that says that a doctor who's negligent will lose their license. So I think this is a recognition from the state that this tactic was a failure, but I think they are still going to look for ways to try to control what people say on the topic of COVID.
Oh, yeah.
And Laura, you actually touched on this a little bit, but given that medical treatment has for ages been tailored for the individual, do you see misinformation laws like this one disrupting that patient-doctor relationship in the future?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question, is that the ethical obligations of a doctor go to their patient. And one thing I've noticed, you can see sometimes there's a switch of language where they say that the doctors have an obligation to public health, and that their obligation isn't so much to the patient, but what they believe is best for everyone. And this isn't how medical ethics has worked in the past. And that seriously causes, if you're a patient and you believe that your doctor is not telling you to get vaccinated, for example, because they think it's best for you, but because they think it's best for others, that is really going to undermine your trust in your doctor.
And what would that mean for that relationship going forward?
Well, if people can't trust their doctors, I think we're going to see this spill over to other areas beyond COVID. I think we already are. We see all kinds of vaccination rates for other diseases with other types of vaccines that have been around a long time have gone way down, and that's because there's a loss in trust. There's certainly a loss in trust with the FDA, the CDC, the medical establishment as a whole, but I think some people really still trust their doctors if they have a personal relationship with them. And I think that's why we're seeing the state trying to go after those doctors to try to control them, because as long as the doctors have that trust with their patients, that's power. They can undermine the government narrative through that one-on-one relationship that a doctor has with their patient.
A lot here. Well, Laura Powell, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Which revealed how the FBI and other agencies were regularly communicating with social networks to censor Americans. That ruling changed things. Of course, the ban on government censorship of that sort did not last in its entirety. The Biden administration has been directly challenging it, and an appeals court in the Fifth Circuit overturned part of it in early September. It argued the ban on government agencies communicating with social media companies was too vague. But the case is, of course, still ongoing, and that being said, the latest ruling is actually even more significant than the July 4th one. It goes beyond just upholding the injunction. It expands it. And even more importantly, it expands that injunction to include a federal agency that functions as the pseudo-heartbeat of government censorship, the agency that beats the drums for censorship for all the other agencies, CISA. Now, the updated injunction also includes the White House, the Surgeon General, the CDC, and, of course, the FBI as well. And again, the battle over censorship, again, it's not over yet. It's very likely to keep going to appeal all the way to the Supreme Court. But for now, the systems of government censorship are largely on hold. The government, at least to a very large extent, cannot directly censor you either through its own actions or by proxy currently. Now, Attorney General Bailey wrote on X that if you don't remember, the Fifth Circuit already handed down a court order blocking the Biden administration from silencing disfavored viewpoints. He noted that CISA was originally not included in the Fifth Circuit's order. They filed a motion asking the Fifth Circuit to include CISA, and that request was granted. So, what exactly is CISA? Attorney General Bailey describes it as the nerve center of the vast censorship enterprise, the very entity that worked with the FBI to silence the Hunter Biden laptop story. But is that the case? Well, yes, it is actually. Now, in the true spirit of the agency, it looks like they've been scrubbing some of their own public records. They've been removing videos on their operations, and they've been redirecting web pages that used to document some of the agency's most concerning practices. But luckily, we have the archives, and I'm going to show them to you. CISA actually has a YouTube page. Now, a lot of it these days is more just videos from webinars and things like cybersecurity alerts and so on. But it wasn't always that way. They used to have some content detailing some of the agency's most controversial programs. One of the videos from June of 2021 was called Countering Disinformation in Social Media. Now, if you were to go to the link to that now on YouTube, you're met with this. It's a simple alert saying this video isn't available anymore. And I did a search online. It looks like they scrubbed it from every discoverable part of the internet. But luckily, I played part of it on Crossroads last year. Let me show you that clip.
Welcome to Cybersecurity 101. Class is in session. Today's lesson, countering disinformation on social media. If you're on social media, you probably know that some information found there is fake or dishonest. How can you tell, and who is behind it? Let's take a closer look. Since 2020, there has been a lot of false and inaccurate information about COVID-19.
Now remember, that's what they're being accused of. The agency was working with social media companies on censorship. And also a big part of the controversies that CISA and the Biden administration ran into really overall when it comes to censorship was about targeting people who covered COVID-19. It turned out they even labeled a handful of online commentators the, quote, disinformation dozen. Government agencies were communicating with social networks like Twitter and Facebook to silence them and many others. Here's former White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki saying as much.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation on social media platforms. All of them remain active on Facebook, despite some even being banned on other platforms, including Facebook, ones that Facebook owns. Third, it's important to take faster action against harmful posts. As you all know, information travels quite quickly on social media platforms. Sometimes it's not accurate, and Facebook needs to move more quickly to remove harmful, violative posts.
Interesting. How does the government know that if they're not monitoring people? But back to CISA. We're often told that these government censorship programs are just about trying to stop foreign disinformation. The problem we're being told is that foreign governments are launching false information campaigns to swing elections, to confuse the public, and to generally spread mayhem. Governments and disinformation, right? They say that disinformation can be false flags, false events. It can be the use of false information in the footnotes of larger arguments. It can even be the use of otherwise true information to draw false conclusions. Misinformation is the other big problem we're told of. It's just outright false information. Now, there's of course controversy on governments trying to censor either of these, since who are they to say what's true and what's not true? But in reality, it actually goes beyond even this. What CISA focuses on is MDM. MDM is misinformation, disinformation, and a third one that they don't talk about as openly. The third one is malinformation. That's malicious information. Information that is true, it's not false, but is labeled as hateful or malicious. Let me show you something. If we go to the URL cisa.gov/MDM, this is what you'll see. It's a page on foreign influence operation and disinformation. Now, it still gives a brief mention of malinformation, and it says that malinformation is based on fact, but used out of context to mislead, harm, or manipulate.
Right out of the OSS manual.
Editing a video to remove important context to harm or mislead. But that's not what that web page used to show. That web page, that same URL, it used to provide a whole lot more information. Let me show you. This is an archive of that exact same URL from May of 2021. And you'll find that not only do they focus on MDM, they even have a team dedicated to it. They call the MDM team. Under the drop-down menu on the MDM guiding principles, it notes that the agency is committed to collaboration with partners and stakeholders. It says this: in addition to civil society groups, researchers, and state and local government officials, the MDM team works in close collaboration with the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force, the U.S. Department of State, the U.S. Department of Defense, and other agencies across the federal government. So think about that. This agency is working on censorship, and it's not just focused on going after false information. It's also going after so-called malinformation, hate speech. It works on this with the FBI, the State Department, even the U.S. military. But it doesn't end there. What are these so-called stakeholders?
We're told CBP has released more than 18,000 migrants into the community of El Paso from processing centers here in just the last 2 weeks. Now, we do know that most of these migrants are going temporarily into shelters in downtown El Paso, but the shelters here are struggling. Shelter leaders tell us many of the migrants coming here are Venezuelans who have very little resources and need more help from the city. But the city's resources and shelter space are both draining fast.
The Opportunity Center for the Homeless has been in operation now for close to 30 years, come January. But we've never seen the number of migrants that have been coming into our community. But we've been seeing the community releases as high as 2,000 to 2,500. And at one point, late last week, we were anticipating those numbers could get up to 7,000.
The city manager tells us right now El Paso is doing everything they can to avoid stream releases, but at this point, it's not sure exactly how long they can keep this up. In El Paso, Texas, Caroline Elliott, Fox 5 News.
You go, you knock on a door. These folks know they're squatting, so they go ahead and escort themselves out once we knock on the door. Sometimes we do face resistance from the squatter.
Wednesday, South Fulton Police shadowed Fulton County deputies during this process because thanks to a new partnership, they're now deputized to eject squatters too.
It can only get better.
That afternoon, no one was home, so property owners changed the locks and authorities moved the suspected squatters' items to the curb. The goal is to return as many South Fulton properties to their rightful owners. South Fulton City Councilwoman Helen Willis says squatters have been a hot topic at public comment meetings, so it was time to double down on the ejection process. At the live desk, Alex Whitler, Fox 5 News.
Alex, thanks so much. Time now for a look at Sky Fox traffic.